Welcome to CityWorks, a co-production of the City University of New York School of Labor and Urban Studies and CUNY TV. I'm Laura Flanders. Each month, CityWorks explores the challenges and lived experiences of working people on the job, at home, and in our communities. Over the past year, the United States has seen the strongest wave of labor organizing and labor unrest in decades, punctuated by several major union strikes and victories, all with the public's support. In fact, American support of unions is now at its highest point since 1965. Today on CityWorks, we'll take a look back at some of our episodes over the past year to see how this surge in organized labor activity has played out across the country and here in New York City, the nation's labor capital. We begin with the unprecedented 2023 United Auto Workers strike. Following their celebrated victory, I spoke with Brian Schneck, a local UAW president, and labor reporter Jane Slaughter. When you look at this strike, what stands out about the significance of what's been won here?
I agree with Brian. The change in the members' attitude toward their own union is just amazing. 4 years ago, they had a strike at General Motors. I went out to the picket lines all the time. And people would just stand there glumly waiting for their international rep to come tell them about their strike benefits. This time, you could feel the pride. People are proud to be auto workers, proud to be UAW members. They love Shawn Fain. They were just love the transparency of the union and the fact that the union had a new strategy that seemed to be rocking the companies back on their heels. So I expect big changes in the members' involvement in their own union.
So you have a fresh leader and you have some new strategy. What was different about the stand-up strike strategy, Brian?
Well, the approach that the UAW had years ago in bargaining with the big three was they would pick a target. They would pick which company do we think that we could get the most favorable deal with, and then we would go to the other two to try to get the same, do a pattern bargain. So the companies knew, okay, this is ready, hit play, this is what's going to happen, right? Well, that didn't happen this time. What happened this time was we were bargaining against the big three. We weren't bargaining just against Ford Motor Company or Stellantis or GM. It was the big three in totality, and we took out assembly plants of each of the manufacturers initially. And then it got escalated. The reasons why it escalated was because of the company's behavior at the bargaining table. If you were going to start being fair and reasonable, well, you got rewarded. We didn't shut down any of your additional operations. If you were being a bastard, well, it was responded to, where they shut down the parts distribution centers for Stellantis and also General Motors. And then it escalated beyond that.
And the unpredictability of it made all the difference, it seems to me. The wins, what has been won here and what's next for this movement? You've got a lot of factories out there making cars, Teslas and others that aren't unionized.
Huge gains in money. What they did not win was to get rid of the tiers on benefits. The lower people still don't have a pension, although they got a huge boost to 401k. They still don't have retiree health care. So that's next. Shawn Fain promises that's next. To do that, he says, we need to be much stronger within the auto industry, which means organizing all these non-union plants, all the German-owned, Japanese-owned, Korean-owned plants that are mostly in the South. And their phones are ringing off the hook. They are getting hundreds of calls a day. People are signing up online. They want to be organized in these plants.
Brian, coming to you, we're all white people having this conversation. We hear this trope about the white working class. That's not who I saw on the picket lines. That's not who I saw standing out there striking in Detroit or at the other auto plants. How would you describe the workforce these days and the UAW of today in terms of culture, diversity, race, gender?
Well, the UAW has long had a relationship with the social movement in this country, the civil rights movement during the 60s and even now. So we fight for economic and social justice. And I'm proud of the fact that we have a very diverse membership. We have a lot of women that are within our ranks. We have a lot of women leaders in our locals, and now it's reflected in our international executive board. The UAW is a very diverse labor organization, and I'm very proud of that. And I'm glad that you raised that, because we are America. The people that you've seen on those picket lines, they're the ones that make this country work. They're the ones that pay the bills of this country. We contribute to the tax base. We're the ones that, we patronize all these small businesses that are in or around the assembly plants and all these small towns across the country. When a plant goes down, it's a vacuum. Yeah. It's just such a shock to a region, within Ohio or whatnot. And that's going to change because of these contracts.
Yeah. The UAW was not the only union to stage an historic strike this past year. The Writers Guild of America and the Screen Actors Guild also walked off the job. It was the first time the two unions had been on strike together since 1960. On day 101 of the 148-day writers' strike, we checked in with strike organizer Josh Gondelman and labor reporter Alex Press about the state of the strike and the union's demands. Alex, take us back to May and this vote. I think it's been underreported just how popular the original strike was. Can you talk about that?
Sure. So the vote you're talking about is the strike authorization vote, where the members of the WGA, including Josh, voted to allow their leadership to call a strike should it be seen as necessary, right, if there was no agreement being reached at the bargaining table. And it was almost unanimous, right? I mean, unbelievable unity among the membership that this was something they were willing to sacrifice for and stay out on the picket lines for. And sure enough, when push came to shove and the studios, who are organized under the title of the AMPTP, when they wouldn't agree to certain things like AI and other of the key issues, the writers walked out, and I think we're on day 101, and the energy is still very high.
So there's lots of aspects having to do with new technology, and we'll get to AI in just a second, but there's also some traditions in the industry that are being challenged or changed, and I've read about some of those, some involving the writer's room, and could you explain what that is?
Yes.
And others involving how you all audition.
So a lot of shows or almost every show that's made has a room of writers, right? There'd be a showrunner who's kind of the boss directing the flow, and then various tiers of writers with various levels of experience. What's happening now is there's pressure from the top, from the studios, to write shows with fewer and fewer writers in the room, faster and faster. Some of that has to do with short seasons, right? But some of it is just they're bringing in, studios are employing writers for what are called mini rooms, which are shorter term, often less pay than their writers are used to on a weekly basis, and then no guarantee to stay through for production. So you're not getting the experience of being on set, helping produce the shows that you write, which is a huge part of training the next generation of showrunners. And it's harder and harder, right? If you're working for 6 weeks on a show, now you have to jump to something else really quick, maybe to earn into the health insurance program for another year. So the instability caused by these mini rooms is huge. I think writer-producer pay over the past decade, median writer-producer pay has gone down about 4%, and then adjusted for inflation, that's like 23% it's decreased.
But just to push back, I mean, Alex and I write in the privacy of our own room. We don't need a whole group of people with us. Why do writers at Hollywood need that?
For sure. So first of all, just from an artistic standpoint, having the multiplicity of perspectives and a diversity of people represented in the room, I think is really huge. And it's starting to become something that more and more people are taking seriously, as they should. And additionally, what we're talking about is a season of TV, right? There's work to be done before the scripts even start. It's not just you're on assignment writing a script. It is you're working in the room to really see how these episodes work together, the arc of the season, how the characters develop, and then writers are going off to write their own scripts. So what it seems like the studios are trying to push us towards is more of like a gig economy writer's room where there's one showrunner and maybe one or two other writers in them. In the room, that's a constant, and then other people are being brought on just for a script fee. And so it really is, again, jeopardizing that stability, you were saying how little stability there is in this industry already, and they're trying to kind of peel away what we've worked so hard for.
I think we've talked about some of the less well discussed, and you've done it brilliantly, aspects of this strike. What has at least gotten a lot of attention is the AI aspect. So Alex, what are the top issues here?
Sure. So they really differ a little bit between the writers and the actors' concerns around AI. So right now for writers, AI is, I would say, not a imminent threat, right? I mean, we've all seen the jokes that ChatGPT can write, and they're terrible. And so this is not really a here and now issue. But the thing is that the Writers Guild especially has been very forward thinking about technology in the past. So the last strike in 2007 was in part it won the ability to have this new media, these streaming services, covered by the Guild's jurisdiction. Now, at the time, there was very little new media to speak of, and in fact, the studio said, don't worry about it, that's not a big deal, who knows what'll come of that, and yet the writers said, no, let's get this in writing now, and I feel like that is how they're treating AI, right? So the Writers Guild wants to have a regulatory kind of apparatus for AI. They don't want it to be used to have literary scripts written. They don't want to have writers being hired to punch up scripts generated by AI. Now, the actors, it's a much more imminent threat. So, I mean, there are a lot of examples that have been kind of going around during this strike of one, this fear that background actors are just going to be scanned, their likenesses, they might be compensated for half a day's work or a day's work, however long it takes to be scanned, and then their likeness can be owned by the studio, right? And I spoke to an actor on the picket line who made this very concrete, and she wasn't even talking about background work. She had hosted a show on Nickelodeon for several seasons, and she was saying to me, there's enough footage of me in the role of host of a television show that a studio could train AI on those images, that footage, and have me then hosting shows I never hosted, saying things I never said, doing things I never did forever, right? And so people really want to make sure that they have consent, that they know what the studios are doing with their likenesses, and that they have to sign off every time. And now the studios have not been willing to meet the actors where they are in that respect. And I think one last thing worth saying here is that when we're talking about getting rid of, whether it's background actors, stunt people, voice actors, the most replicable performers rather than, say, Tom Cruise, though certainly there have been, deep fakes of Tom Cruise too. We're also talking about all sorts of other work that goes away. You don't need hair and makeup if you don't have real people. You don't need costume design if you don't have real people. So this is a threat to a number of the unions and the types of workers that are in the entertainment industry. And this is another thing that's very different from the last strike, is that from the beginning of the writer's strike, the Teamsters and IATSE, so the below-the-line workers, the grips, the camera, electrician, hair and makeup, have been respecting the picket lines of the writers, refusing to cross and thus giving up their own pay, right? Because they know both that a win for the writers and the actors is going to be a win for them. Their contracts expire next year. And also there's been, again, that building of connections, and there's sort of bigger structural causes here for why workers might start to kind of be on the same side of things rather than acting just in their own interests here. And I think that is really important because, again, those workers are going to have their contracts expire next year. And so they're looking to see, that their colleagues win.
At the conclusion of their strike, the Writers Guild approved a contract agreement with the major studios, which included pay increases, minimum staffing requirements for writers' rooms, and restrictions on studio uses of artificial intelligence. The Screen Actors Agreement with the major studios included increases in minimum salaries, a new streaming participation bonus, and more protections against their images and voices being replicated by artificial intelligence. Next up, organizing in support of adjunct professors. Today, more than half of all college courses in the U.S. are taught by adjunct instructors, those non-tenured track faculty almost always working part-time for less money, no benefits, and with almost no job security. But on some campuses, they're organizing and fighting back. I spoke recently with labor leaders from the Professional Staff Congress in New York City and SEIU Local 509 in Boston. Some people call this whole layer of work contingent faculty. Is that the right term? How would you describe the group that we're talking about, James?
I think contingent faculty is a much better, more appropriate term now than adjunct faculty. Adjunct suggests that this is a teaching workforce that augments the regular workforce of the institution. But as you stated in your introduction, adjuncts or contingent faculty are now the normative workforce in the academies. One of the ways I think it's important for us to understand the kind of metastasized nature of the adjunct workforce is that they are effectively subsidizing the universities they work for, because the universities are saving so much on their budgets.
And it's really important to think about the gender and race implications of
Please
that.
do.
So contingent faculty are almost very disproportionately people of color and women. And, you know, there are arguments that say that the old model in which you got a stable tenure track job and kept it forever, that was when the field of the professoriate was for white men. And when lots of women and people of color and queers started to get PhDs, that's when higher ed said, oh, they don't really need real jobs. We'll just give them this side thing. And then admins realized how profitable it was. And so now, you know, nobody likes it anymore, but the structural change has been made and you can't undo the slide into adjunctification that we have now.
We're going to talk about some of the struggles that are taking place right now to try to address this situation. But boy, when I hear Anne describe it that way as a structural change within the quote unquote industry, it doesn't sound unique. It doesn't sound unrelated to what we're seeing throughout our economy, namely that phenomenon of gigification, Uberification, if you like.
Yeah, people are referring now to the gig economy. Yep.
Is it distinct in the sense that, is it too distinct for alliances to be built? Or could there be real alliances around workers in the academic field and workers elsewhere? James?
Yeah, I think absolutely. That the through line that you see is increasing dependence on workers as if the workers are entrepreneurs. And in fact, there's a real degradation of the profession, the skill, in whatever the industry may be. So, yeah, I mean, I've been very inspired by the extent to which academic workers in all kinds of titles have sought unionization, have used their collective bargaining power once they've won unions in order to push for better job security, better benefits, better pay. I think that is, over the past 2, 3, 5 years, in academic contingent workers have been really at the forefront of a lot of labor organizing. I think there's lots of opportunity and ground for common cause across industries.
As you look at the kind of Uberification, the gigification of this academy of ours, are you anticipating that this will lead to a kind of political chilling as well? We've seen so much progress really in our lifetimes around expanding the curriculum and so on.
Yeah, I'm not thinking that it leads to a political chilling because in my experience, the people who are vulnerable are the people who are brave. So tenure track faculty are not risk takers. They tend to be very conservative. They deny it, but they don't challenge the power structures that provide them comfort. Whereas adjuncts have, I can assure you, not much to lose. And they're very aware of that. So they're much more likely to organize. They're much more likely to fight for grad students, to fight to improve higher education, which is so based on this fake meritocracy. And adjuncts know that and want to fix it. So there's a way that adjuncts, because they're so disrespected and so likely to be in other minority categories, know how to fight and are willing to do it and willing to be the leaders in changing what higher education can do and be.
And they are doing that. Look around the country, I'm seeing situation after situation. Which one do you want to lift up first? I mean, we had a grad student strike here at Columbia University. They've been successful, I think, mobilizations at Rutgers, NYU. That's just in the New York area.
Yeah, New School a couple of years ago, NYU, Columbia grad students, Rutgers very recently struck their part-time lecturers, made some significant gains. We were talking before the show a little bit about Columbia College in Chicago, and then very recently the Cal State Union did, I think, a one-day strike it was, and management came around and they made significant gains. So it's really inspiring to see the organizing around contingency and, as Anne said, in connection with graduate workers, because graduate students as workers are looking around at the job market that awaits them, and they see common cause with folks who have been out in the field for a while now, struggling with tough working conditions in academia. And I would say on a structural level, we find that at CUNY, there's a direct correlation really across the state of New York between the whiteness of the institution, the whiteness of the student body, and the contact with full-time faculty. Now, you know, there has been in many states a defunding of the public education systems, and that defunding in a way has been absorbed by movement off the tenure track of significant portions of the teaching workforce. But one of the things that we're fighting for in our union is to improve the ratio of full-time faculty to full-time equivalent students. And we see it as a racial justice issue here in the city of New York. There's no reason why CUNY, that serves a student body that's 80% people of color, more than a third of whom were born in a foreign country, why they should have so much less access to full-time faculty members in their experience. And again, not a pejorative way of talking about individual part-time faculty, but as a structural question, to support those students in the same way as one would find at other universities. So we're supporting a bill called the New Deal for CUNY, which includes professionalization of adjunct wages, but also includes improving the ratio of full-time faculty to students.
In New York City, workers' rights activism and solidarity are on the rise. In fact, the city has seen a torrent of worker activism of late. New York City Council member Carmen de la Rosa and New York City Central Labor Council President Vincent Alvarez had much to say about this when we spoke recently. Councilmember de la Rosa, what do you find out there? And have you noticed a change in enthusiasm when it comes to backing worker rights, even from people who aren't themselves unionized?
Absolutely. We are seeing that there is an excitement around our communities organizing. When workers organize, they also organize the broader communities. In my district, for example, I can tell you that the Starbucks workers were out in force. And every parent that walked by a Starbucks worker when they were out in force was asking, what is happening here? It is not enough to just go get our coffee at these corporations, corporate locations, but also to understand what is happening to workers here. It was the nurses, as Vinny said, who set the tone for us. I have New York Presbyterian Hospital in my backyard, and it was egregious to see the nurses coming right out of a pandemic where we banged our pots and called them heroes and sheroes, asking for the bare minimum. And so we've seen that there is excitement growing. We also see that as legislators, there is an understanding that it's not only about lifting communities when we think about policy decisions, but also lifting workers, because when we lift workers, we are indeed lifting our communities, lifting wages, lifting benefits, lifting families as we go. And so there is an excitement, there is an enthusiasm, and I hope that enthusiasm endures.
Well, let's talk about what has caused it, because, I mean, the kind of organizing you're talking about, Carmen, if I may call you that, is what labor writer and organizer Jay McAlevey for years has called whole worker organizing, organizing the worker at home, the worker in their community, the worker at their school, at their church, bringing in the community. And that wasn't always the way that labor leaders organized their campaigns. So this change, particularly in the level of public receptivity, has actual concrete roots perhaps we can track. It's not just a change in the weather. You want to talk a little bit about that, Carmen, the changes that you've seen? And then Vinny, I'd love to hear the same from you.
Yeah, absolutely. I will tell you that when we saw our nation turn to a more conservative route, when we saw, Trump come in and pack the courts with anti-union judges, where we saw decisions start to come out, I think it was a real wake-up call for folks to understand that we must organize within our communities, that when we talk about school crossing guards, something as simple as that. When we walk our children to school, are they safe? Those are union workers. Grocery stores in our community who are feeding us during the pandemic. Those are folks that are critical to our communities. And so, we started to see these massive tax breaks for the wealthy. We started to see corporations who exist in our communities through franchises really take advantage of workers. And it's something we saw before, but it was so egregious coming out of a pandemic where I think communities really felt that if the system was broken the way the pandemic showed us it was, then we can't put it back together in the normal course of work as we would before the pandemic. We have to build something different and something new. And the plight of workers is at the center of that, right? We can't be safe. We can't have adequate health care. We can't have adequate housing. We can't construct affordable housing if we don't have the well-being of workers at the center. And so I think really that was the shift that brought us here where we are today. We are seeing legislation coming forward. I chair the Civil Service and Labor Committee, as you mentioned, and we're seeing every day our colleagues are coming in, not just with pieces of legislation because unions have told us this is what we need to do, but because constituents have come into our office and said, I am a laborer, I am a nurse, I am a teacher, and this is how we need our city and our state legislators to act in accordance if we are going to have strong communities. And we feel good about what is happening here.
It reminds me of what we heard from Chicago during the teachers' strike years back, where you heard the entire communities organized even before COVID, or the teachers in Appalachia, in West Virginia, same thing, organizing. But it does seem as if COVID has made a real difference.
It has, and I think there's a tipping point in all of these struggles, and workers have reached a tipping point. That were 40 years of growing inequality, 40 years of corporate greed and attacks on workers in the workplace, and then all of a sudden, 4 years ago, we had COVID hit, and they were asked to do more. They were put in unsafe workplaces and conditions in order to address some of the issues that first responders and others, even beyond first responders, had to deal with. They were dealing with continuing rising inequality, the affordability crisis, and many of them, as their contracts were coming due, or workers who weren't represented, said, well, we got to turn towards collective action, and within that collective action, it's got to be broader than just people in our workplaces. It's got to be people that we live with, people that we work with, people in our communities, people in our houses of worship, and that's how we have to do this level of organizing. So, workers, it is real, and that's what. And I think that, as I said earlier, inequality, affordability crisis, workers pushing back after the pandemic, and you see the support for workers at historical highs, certainly from my lifetime.
That's it for CityWorks. If you have comments or questions, write to us at cityworks@slu.cuny.edu. For CityWorks, I'm Laura Flanders. Thanks for watching.